أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبا القاسم مصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله. I'd like to begin by sending my condolences firstly to the Imam of our time, and secondly to the mu'mineen, especially those of you who are in our program tonight on the anniversary of the martyrdom of our 11th holy Imam, Imam Hassan al-Askari. And I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to another one of our live Friday night programs via YouTube and Facebook. To begin tonight's program, I'd like to call upon our young brother Salman Zabuli to enlighten our hearts with verses of the Holy Quran. Please welcome him with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما وداك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much, Brother Salman, for that beautiful recitation. May Allah grant you success in everything you do in your life. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight's topic will be back to our book review series on the book Man and Universe by Shahid Mutahari. So the topic for tonight is how to value information and its sources, which will be based on chapters 5 and 6 of the book Man and Universe. Without any further delay, I'd like to call upon His Eminence Sheikh Hamad Waqar and Sheikh Ali Saftari. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum Shaykhna, assalamu alaikum everyone. I want to give a little brief introduction to this chapter, kind of go through it really quick, and then open up a related discussion on it where we're not going to be looking at causes of wrong thinking, but rather we're going to be trying to examine how scholars would utilize the sources of knowledge and the sources of Islam to ascertain Islamic opinions on various topics, right? But let's just start with a brief kind of summary of this chapter. Shahid Mutahari, he categorizes Islamic teachings into the normal 3 categories, where you have theological beliefs, you have akhlaq or morality, and you have fiqh or Islamic law, right? And then pretty much immediately thereafter, he looks at a few causes of wrong thinking, right? Where maybe someone will utilize one of these methods and they won't ascertain what the truth is or what the true Islamic opinion on a certain topic might be. And he relies on the Quran for each one of these causes of wrong thinking that he categorizes. First one is reliance on conjecture, on the dhann, instead of sure knowledge. So instead of, I guess, yaqeen, or at least, etminan. So what he states, a verse of Quran is, most people are such that if you follow them, they will lead you away from the right path. Why? Because they rely on conjecture only. Okay, now, obviously, what's meant here is that when we want to find out what the truth is, or we want to find the Islamic opinion on a certain matter, we should obtain enough knowledge that we're certain about it before we conclude that that's the Islamic opinion, right? Or that's truth. We shouldn't just, get half of the way and, just say, most likely it's this, or probably it's that, right? You want to be sure. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one is to stay away from bias and base desires, right? You should be impartial when you're searching for truth. You shouldn't think that truth will be what you might have thought about before, right? You need to look at it with an open mind, try to rid yourself of any kind of bias or base desire that you have, and then look at the situation. The verse of Quran that he uses in Surah Najm, they follow but conjecture and that which themselves desire. Third example of, a cause of wrong thinking is what he calls haste. And that's kind of making a conclusion before you have enough knowledge, before you have enough information, right? So coming to the conclusion hastily, right? The verse of Quran that he uses, you've been given but little knowledge. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam has a hadith. He says in the two verses of the Quran, Allah has warned men against two things. One, he has said that they must not believe a thing unless they have sure knowledge about it. And that's a warning against hasty belief. And two, he has said that they must not deny a thing unless they have sure knowledge about it. And that points to a warning against hasty denial, right? So both accepting or denying something without enough evidence, right? Without taking the time to really research it. Fourth one is traditional thinking and looking into the past. And I think this is a common one that's used in the Quran. Surah Baqarah, we follow the traditions of our forefathers. What? Even though their forefathers did not understand anything and had no guidance. So here what Shaykh Mutahari is pointing out is that we can't just assume that our ancestors or forefathers or people of the past were correct without us actually examining the issue and examining what we're looking at. So we have to do our own research, and we can't rely on what people were doing in the past. And the last one that he mentions is translated as cult of personality. And the verse of the Quran, O Lord, we obeyed our chiefs and great men who misled us from the right path. And here it's against the fallacy where people will look at the person who's making an argument and not the argument themselves, or if so-and-so amazing person that we look up to and respect said something, we're going to accept it without further researching and looking into it. And that's a cause of wrong thinking, right? We have to actually examine it, and we can't just take someone else's word for it, right? And this is where Shaykh Mutahari ends this 5th chapter, where he's basically listing a number of causes of what did he translate it as exactly? Causes of wrong thinking. Now with that, I actually wanted to open up, Sheikh Ali, I wanted to open up the topic where we look at it from the opposite way, and we try to examine how it is that we approach Islamic literature and approach trying to find out what an Islamic opinion is on a matter. Now, obviously, disclaimer, neither one of us are mujtahids, so neither one of us have the tools necessary to derive an Islamic opinion, but both of us have studied a little bit and kind of recognize how the mujtahideen go about looking at Islamic sources, and that's what we're going to try to describe, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Shaykhana. Thank you for the useful introduction. Hope you've been well. And that's a really big mug. I thought I was. This is a very relevant topic and one that has uses in both an academic way, in the sense that if you're a person who researches into the Islamic literature, is trying to find out information, then you need to follow according to this methodology and avoid certain dangers on the way. And also very relevant to most of us who are not investing a lot of time in research, but given that we are Muslims and our religion matters to us, and we live in the age of information, we live in the age of social media, then whether we like it or not, information is coming our way. It's no longer, it's like oxygen. It's no longer we really have a choice. I mean, we do. If we close our social media and our technology, then there will never be that information input, that overload of information. But as long as we live as 21st century men and women, then it's just going to be part of our nature. So it's relevant to both the academic, if you like, and the layman. And what I see and have also, Sheikh Hamid has probably studied 3 times more than me. He said we both have studied a little, which is inaccurate. So, I mean, just look at the bead. It's containing all the knowledge. Jokes aside, what I have observed, Sheikhana, is that just the ease of information has made making an opinion on Islamic issues much easier for those of us who have access to the internet. We can now open books of hadith. We can open books that would, naturally only be read and studied after you had passed certain introductions and muqaddamat, and you had done your studies in Arabic, in logic, in legal theory, in some fiqh, some introductory kalam, maybe some philosophy, and then you'll be reading some of these books. Or even more, let's see, more intricate and more serious than that is interpreting verses of the Quran. Nothing comes to the Quran is a very interesting book. It provides information for any person that reads it. Anyone is able to take something away from the Quran. And that's why we're encouraged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to read the Quran daily, to make a connection with it. Because at each level we enter the Quran, whatever our academic background is, we're able to take something from it that will actually help us in our lives and our way of thinking. However, sometimes we see that a person who is like myself at level 5 of understanding Islamic history and Islamic sciences, then is making an criticism or an opinion on a verse of the Quran on an interpretation that someone at level 95 has made. You can maybe, have an argument with your brother. I can have an argument with my brother who's at the similar level at mine on what we think about this verse, and that will be a very useful discussion. But am I in a position then, without having understood that deeper interpretation of the verse, to completely nullify what has been mentioned? So this is a popular trend, and our keyboard warriors are spending a lot of time, which is good in a sense. This information is out there. People, we will have to read. It's good that we are reading, don't get me wrong. But the fact that it's not structured, the fact that we are not following a hierarchy of reading, just jumping from, this book to that book and then making our own conclusions is, I think, very dangerous. And one thing that really becomes interesting for me is when we express opinion on the verdicts faqih, for example, has made. And, this finds its most beautiful and majestic manifestation during moon sighting.
And it's good. I think it's good people expressing opinion in a like, it shows that they care. But I don't know, sometimes it borders on academic illiteracy. It borders on sometimes just being plain out disrespectful. Um, can the person who's making these criticisms open an actual advanced book of fiqh and read his argument, the argument of a faqih, and point out the problems he has with it? If he genuinely has problems, can he point out the problems with it? There is Einstein's theory of special relativity. It's crazy. Like, the results of that theory are phenomenal. Time dilation, time slows down, space contracts, so many different things. It's so counterintuitive. But just because it's counterintuitive to me, you don't hear someone criticizing Einstein from a year 12 classroom saying, oh, this is a bunch of nonsense. If you do want to do something to prove Einstein wrong, you have to go and study the relevant mathematics and the physics, and then come and actually criticize the steps in his argument. And I don't know why that same methodology and same approach is missed in our sciences. So I think the reason for that is that because we all have a ghira for our religion, we all care for our religion, and the religion affects our lives. Einstein's theory of special relativity might not affect our lives directly. No one sits down and thinks about, the effects of, if I were to travel at 95% the speed of light. But when you're fasting, when you're praying, when you're transacting in your life, religious laws affect your way of life. So in that sense, we feel entitled to have an opinion. We're going to say, oh, well, this doesn't make sense. No, it should be that way. It should be the other way. So what do you think, Shaykhana, is, in a sense, the position of the common man's or the common woman, to be politically correct, the common humans' understanding of religion in criticizing, in just giving opinion on fiqh issues for argument's sake? What value does that have? What are the limits? What are the boundaries? And what are the scopes to it?
Before I answer that, let me just throw it, like, there's three main kind of categories of people that I kind of derive from your talk there that are making mistakes. And I'm not going to look at intention or motive. I'm going to say everyone has pure intentions here, and people with pure intentions can make mistakes also. And this is how a lot of people make mistakes, right? So you have people who fall into the trap of confirmation bias, right? They have an opinion on an Islamic matter, and then their research is to confirm that opinion. So they go and they try to find hadith to confirm the opinion that they already have. So let's say, the imam has ilm al-ghaib, has access to hidden information, right? And they hold this belief. Now they're going to go and they're going to scour the internet and try to find interpretations of verses of Quran or a hadith or words of scholars that confirm what their opinion was. And then they post that, right? So obviously, when you look at something academically, that's the wrong approach, right? As Shahid Mutahiri said, we need to take away all bias and we need to look at something impartially. And if you're only looking to confirm the opinion that you already had, then that's not true research, right? And I think a lot of people fall into that trap. Second category is people who genuinely want to find the truth on a certain matter, people who are looking at a certain subject, but they don't know how to utilize the sources of Islam, right? So maybe they don't know Arabic or Farsi, and they're not able, probably both languages, and they're not able to find all of the relevant information. Maybe they are, but they don't know how to navigate through all of the sources that we have and how to juggle between words of scholars and even ahadith that might seem contradictory to one another, right? And they just don't have these skills or these methodologies because they haven't gone through the training, right? So they're merely just kind of skimming the surface and finding things and then basing their opinion off of them, but they're unable to really go deep into, to research correctly in the matter, right? So you have those people. And then the third type of person is another category, and this kind of falls into the last things that you were saying. And this category of people are those who look at a lot of times fiqh conclusions or ahkam or rulings of Islam, like moon sighting you mentioned, or anything else, and they have an opinion about what they think the ruling should be. Where does this come from? Who knows, right? Who knows? Does it come from themselves? They just, between them, just in their heart, they feel it should be something, or they might have heard one marja has this opinion and they like that, whatever it is. Wherever it came from, they're criticizing and saying that, all of these ulama are wrong, they don't understand this, or whatever. Like, and as you said, a lot of times disrespectfully. Now, I think, again, if we want to say, we want to have the assumption here that the person has pure intention. So I'm not going to assume that the person is trying to ridicule the muraja. They just, I would say, they have a misunderstanding of what a marja does to ascertain the fatwa. So as you said, if they look at their larger books that are not even, sometimes it's just the classes, like the Dars al-Kharij might not be annotated, right? But if they come across their argument, are they going to try to poke holes in their argument? No, they're trying to poke hole in that conclusion of their argument without even looking at what was, what the arguments were to sustain it. So with moon sighting, for instance, there's ahadith that are used, there's principles that are used to determine the ruling. Now, when you look at these ahadith, then you have to look at them, and you have to look at the chain of narration. You have to look at what the hadith is actually saying. So like ruya to halal, or like observing the crescent moon. What does that mean? What does the word ruya, or looking or observing, mean? Does that include telescope? Does that not include telescope? And there's all kinds of arguments here that the scholar has to consider and utilize and make a ruling from. And I think a lot of people are just misinformed on that process and think they just think deriving an Islamic law is simple. It's a hadith that says this is haram. There you go. This is how you pray. This is how you do wudu. What's hard about that? It's simple. So I think there's a big misunderstanding with that. Now, with your question about what the position of someone when it comes to ahkam or fiqh or Islamic laws should be, right? So we're all mukallafin. A mukallaf does not have the authority to have their opinion overrule the ruling of the marja, right? So there's a reason why we follow a marja. And by following the marja, we're saying we are unable to derive Islamic rulings because we're not a mujtahid, right? So we don't have that that ability, right? We could get it. We could go to Qom and we could study and we could become mujtahideen. There's nothing holding us back except for ourselves, but we haven't done that. And because we haven't done that, we're just not in that position. So yes, we can look at the Islamic laws and we could come to conclusions that I agree with this, and I don't really understand how that could be the case. Like, I don't get it, but because I'm just not at that level, I'm going to follow what the marja says. And I could research it more, I could ask, I could look into it, I could ask ulama, I could try to find out what his reasoning is. But at the end of the day, as a mukallaf, we're duty bound to follow the rulings of the marja, right? that doesn't mean we shouldn't research and we shouldn't study and we shouldn't try to increase our knowledge, but that study does not override, the amount of effort and study that the marja has done. Because, with the situation that we're in and with the abilities that we have, we would be nowhere near their amount of studies. But we could discuss that a little bit further. There is a question that popped up. Let's tackle that. It's actually from the introduction that I gave, and then we'll go back into what we're talking about. So based on the causes listed for wrong thinking by Shahid Mutahri in his book, does it mean if we are Muslims following our parents, I believe, it's not valuable, or how should it be? All right, so that's the forefather argument of wrongful thinking. So yeah, basically, we're not saying that the words of our parents don't hold any weight and don't hold any value. That would be wrong and rude. But what we are saying is that we should not come to conclusions, right, about anything just because someone else said so. Right? So whoever it is, if one of our parents say, right, Islam says this, or this is what, your belief should be, right? That doesn't mean that it's off your shoulders and you don't have to research and you don't have to come to your own conclusion. Now, if, let's say, like Sheikh Ali, your father is an amazing person, right? If your father says, look, this is what the Islamic ruling is, that might, be part of my argument for accepting it. But it's not going to be the whole thing. I'm not just going to say, oh, this is it because Sheikh Ali's dad said so, and therefore I don't need to think anymore and I'm good. No, I still have to look into it. I still have to think whether or not I agree with it or not. But I think what the sense of wrongful thinking is more looking at, though, is, culturally, this belief existed over time, and we're just going to keep going and not really look into it, right? So I think what Shahid Mutahri is trying to say and point to is, no matter where you get a source of information from, still use your brain and think and consider other options and come to a conclusion with all the necessary information. I don't know. Do you think that that's going too far? Like, I don't want to sound like I'm disregarding the words of parents or anything like that, because that's not my intention here. I don't want to sound like, oh, it's all about your own personal thought and who cares about everyone else, because that's not what I'm saying either. But I think what Shahid Mutahri is getting at is just, make sure that you look at all aspects of a issue before you come to a conclusion, right? And one of those aspects might be your parents, might be, Muslim scholars or whatever. Use that and still look into it, though. Does that make sense? Am I just babbling around?
Yeah, I think it also depends on what your parents or what your Islamic, the person you go to for your Islamic questions are saying. If they are reminding you of these duties are yours, you need to do the following, you need to make sure you stay away from certain things, and they're reminding you of these things, not only that you have to listen, you have to show a lot of respect when you listen. But if they're giving you an argument about the religion, they're giving an argument where you also can engage critically with, you can engage intellectually with, then treat them like anyone else. Then, of course, forget your respect. In fact, more respect should be given to your parents when you are having a discussion with them, because it is easy to fall into bad etiquette when we are discussing and disagreeing with someone in particular. So we should be much, much more careful. Sometimes probably best to even avoid, if we feel that we can't control our etiquette during a discussion, probably just best to avoid having a discussion with our parents if we're going to fall out of line in terms of our manners. But if we can control ourselves while we disagree with our parents, if we do disagree with them, then have an intellectual discussion with them. From time you mentioned my father, I have the blessing of always having discussions with him, and I don't always agree with him, but we have discussions. He presents his side, I present my side, and just because I've studied a few years, it doesn't mean he's going to accept my word. He still has his arguments, and just because he's my father, it's not like I'm going to accept what he has to say. So we're able to, engage in an intellectual argument while keeping the boundaries of a healthy and respectful discussion.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think what Shahid Mutahir is pointing to, like on a theological point, right? If your dad says God exists, and then you say, okay, I believe in God because my dad said so, that's wrong.
That's
right? You need to have your own opinion of why you think God exists. Now, your dad's opinion might lead you into, trying to confirm what he said, but you're duty bound to have your own rational thought and reasoning as to why you hold your theological beliefs, for instance. Like, if that makes sense.
Of course.
All right. So let's look at what we're talking about with regards to people making mistakes in the way that they're coming to their Islamic answers. Let's start with the confirmation bias one, because that's actually something that came up in a discussion I was in another group today, actually. So they were looking at some parenting styles like that are popularly attacked on TikTok, and it's labeled as like a narcissistic parenting style, and then it basically tries to destroy the fabric of a parent child relationship, right? And one of the things that was mentioned is that, look, what happens is a child will look at this or might search this or something, and then because of the algorithms that that are instilled in these social media platforms, it'll just keep showing them the same thing. So it just keeps confirming what they were looking at before. So it's not exactly confirmation bias, but once you search one thing or you look at one thing enough, now YouTube or whatever, Instagram or whatever you're looking at is going to keep throwing things that are similar to what you were looking at. Because
it's worse than confirmation bias.
Yeah. So it's like, it's confirmation bias, but by a third party that's making you
and confirmation bias, you go after the information, now they're just giving it to you.
Yeah, they're feeding it to you. Yeah. And it comes to a point where you see so much of it that you think it's the popular opinion. You think it's the majority opinion because that's all you're seeing.
That's right.
Right. And it's very dangerous. And a lot of times this is what happens with our brothers and sisters who are, trying to argue points online or whatever, right? They're either getting information from like-minded individuals and regurgitating it, or they're all they're doing is finding information from these algorithms that keep pumping the same thing to them over and over again. Right? And it's really hard to have an unbiased, research on a subject when this is what's happening. You have A, the algorithms, and then B, the only sources that you're looking at are sources that are in agreement with you already. And then you're just, kind of pumping it out. And I see that a lot. Like, I see a lot of times the arguments that are presented are arguments that, just keep on repeating themselves. And there's nothing new. It's the same old thing, just with different words for, decades and decades, if not more than that. So I think that's a big issue. And that's a problem that exists not only amongst ourselves, but everywhere. Now, would you agree that that is something that exists? What should we do? How do we tackle it? Like, what can be done?
Yeah, we're talking about information sources, and subhanAllah, TikTok has now become a source of information. And professionals, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have TikTok myself, but I know professionals are using it to advertise for their other platforms. and a lot of people are using it. And it's not new. What you're mentioning in terms of the algorithms, Facebook does the same thing, Instagram does the same thing. Essentially, it's the choir singing for the choir, you know, all the time. And you just keep getting your beliefs affirmed and reaffirmed. And that's why it's a really comfortable place to go to. You know, it works really well for them in terms of their marketing and making sure you come back to the platform. Now, a healthy thing to do is to be comfortable on not having an opinion, on saying, I don't know. This is cliched in a sense, but it's not. I feel like we can work more on it, on ourselves, including myself. That if there is an opinion, yes, you've read one article, yes, you've read 2 articles, you've watched 5 lectures, and just wait. Now you've read all the arguments potentially in a span of 1 week on a certain issue, and you've come to a good understanding of where the conclusion should lie. It's okay. If the truth is what you think the truth is, wait a week. Leave it for a week and come back to it again. See if that vibe, that wave that was carrying you towards a particular conclusion still exists. Your mind would have, exited that atmosphere and now might be thinking more critically. I personally experience this a lot of the times when I'm studying a certain subject, a certain session, a lesson, a dars on a particular topic. I have certain questions, I have certain mindset objections, and then I just write down my objections. I don't really, and this was advised to me by my teachers because I often tend to ask a lot of questions, and my teacher's like, just wait a minute, write them down, think about them, and then if it's really a question, then approach me. And I started doing that, and I would write down the questions, and I would come back to them a week, and I realized, well, that's a pretty stupid question, for example, or I know the answer now, or the way I actually did not even understand the material properly. This Sheikh Hassan Zadeh al-Muli rahmatullah alayhi passed away about 2-3 weeks ago, and someone was narrating a story from him who was attending his Ibn Sina's Shifa, his book Shifa, I think, and after the session, he had a few questions on Ibn Sina's discussions, and then Ali Hassan Zadeh told him, just go think about it for a second. These people that were teaching these things, Ibn Sina, Mullah Sadra, Aristotle, Plato, these philosophers from the West, from the East, Muslim, non-Muslim, they weren't shopkeepers. They were intellectuals. They were heavyweight thinkers. If you and I are spending, 20 minutes a day thinking about something really hastily, these individuals, go on 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes years thinking about an issue before they come to a conclusion. So they're not shopkeepers. They didn't work in Fillmington market selling fish. No disrespect to that, but I'm just saying their category of their line of work was ideas. Their line of work was arguments. They spent hours, years discussing these, pulling these apart. So the first rule is patience. The first rule that can really help with that is we don't have to have if someone asks us, especially social media, once again, encourages us to this, that there is, recently this whole COVID and the vaccination, I don't know what to call it, but a lot was going on with that, right? And we all felt that we need to have an opinion. Seriously, we don't need to have an opinion all the time. We can take our time studying, and we don't have to always mention even if we have an opinion, here's the other step. That opinion doesn't have to always come out. It's good to come out, but it doesn't always have to come out on especially platforms like you mentioned, to 300, 400, 1,000 people that you really don't know. And the second rule, I think, which would help avoid the confirmations bias is being in touch with different people. With people they disagree with you. With people that completely have different mindsets to you. Go and then present the argument and see how they think about it, because then they will see where you've already made assumptions. They will see where you have gone a certain way where a different route could have been taken. But myself, growing up in a certain environment, reading a certain type of material, would have completely ignored that. And this is something very important, not only for the layman, but people like myself, but also people who are dealing in academia, right? Whether that be in the Hausa or non-Hausa. What sometimes I see, unfortunately, with some of our more, I don't know, maybe, public personalities, is that you feel like recently they've come to realize there are other opinions that exist there. And they've just recently discovered these opinions. And no one else has, and they have. Habibi, these opinions have been around for a very long time. When we are spending our time in a certain field, in a certain topic, the first thing we have to do is go to different and disagreeing opinions and give them their due right. And intellectual maturity requires us to put ourselves into the shoes of the other person, to see the completely disagreeing opinions. And this is one of the beauties of Qom. People who are in Qom or any other city, Najaf, wherever, on the top of the alleyway, there is Fulan scholar who has a certain opinion, a certain methodology, and on the end of the alleyway, or 2 streets down, there's another scholar with a complete different methodology, right? And let's point the criticism to ourselves. Sometimes some of our students who go to Hausa, we already have these confirmation biases. We're going to particular scholars we already like, and we're only going to them. Of course, we're only going to see Islam through one perspective, through one methodology, and then we'll come back and saying the same things, and we'll become very intolerant to another view, a different methodology. So the same thing as student of knowledge in any field has to do in visiting different academics, visiting different experts, and seeing their conflicting methodologies, so that he could have intellectual maturity. So he doesn't get excited when tomorrow he hears something else, like, oh, this is so new. Oh, this must be right then if it's new. No. Had we spent enough time reading from everyone, then we would have actually become more intellectually mature. And the same thing goes for anyone on any issue.
And just to add with that as well, I definitely agree with that. And I think some people might try to do that, right? They might try to look at what other people's opinions are, but it's especially in our circles and our, I think Islamic scholarship, but it's not only us, where we'll look at what one of our scholars says their opinion is. We're not even looking at what, we won't even actually go to their books or go to their scholars. So if we want to look at Christianity, we're going to see what Sheikh Fulan says, about Jesus and Prophet Muhammad being prophesied in the Bible or whatever, right? We're not going to go and ask a priest. If we want to look at what Judaism says, we're not going to a rabbi. We're going to go and see we're going to find a book by an Islamic scholar about Judaism, right? Or Buddhism, same thing. I don't know how many times I've read like a little excerpt of some I don't even know how to pronounce the word, but some Buddhist scripture confirming something we said, right? Where I could go and say, yeah, this exists in Buddhist scripture, right? But maybe they have a completely different opinion of what that means. And I've never gone and asked anyone, right? So I think, just
we had
being
an example
aware
of this a few weeks ago, right? With the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. We had
exactly. Yeah. So just being aware of, information from other sources, I don't think that's even enough. Like if we want to know what their argument is, we have to actually try to see what they say, right? And it's not bad listening to opinions that you disagree with, right? You're listening to it, and as you said, you should be listening to it intently. Like you should, with a open mind, this is what this person is saying, let me hear his arguments, let me hear what he's saying, and then I'll make a decision later whether I agree with it or not. First step is, though, understanding what he's saying, and then second step is trying to see whether or not you agree with it, right? And a lot of times if we go and, like in the other circle that we're in, right? So we're in another group where we go and we discuss different Islamic topics, and the topic for next week is a person who has views that are different than us. Listen to his views, and then we'll try to critique him, right? So already step one, we're saying this person's wrong, right? So when I listen to him, when I listen to him, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find holes in his argument before actually listening to what he's saying, right? So the step one should be take a step back. Let's hear this guy out. Let's see what his arguments are. Let's understand what he's saying. Step two, then let's examine it and analyze it and see whether or not I agree with it, right? So it's all about the approach that we take. Right? And I think the approach is very important, right? So if we're trying to compare two ideologies, we have to understand the other ideology from their sources. If we're trying to look at two arguments within Shia Islam, right, where there's two different methodologies, two different approaches to a certain issue, right? We can't just say, all right, I agree with this scholar because I like this scholar and he's more in line with my, with my style or whatever. And so whatever his opinion is, I'm accepting it. And then this guy who I disagree with, I'm gonna disagree with everything you say. I don't care. I'm not even gonna listen. Right? Whatever you say is wrong because it's you. And I think that's a lot of people fall into that. Maybe not overtly, but a lot of people do fall into that kind of bias that, scholar A, whatever he says, I'm gonna accept. Scholar B, I'm gonna disagree with him on anything that's different. Right? And we fall into that a lot.
That's right. This really sort of shows itself in the Sunni Shia polemics as well. There is a hadith, for example, found in, let's say, Sunan Abi Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi. And when we read it, the way we read it, perhaps, it could confirm an understanding we have, a tenet of our faith, a certain hukum in fiqh, and it really may be the case. It may be the case that this hadith or this opinion of a scholar is in confirmation objectively in our favor. Fair enough. But a lot of the times also, what happens is that we find a hadith, sometimes weak hadith according to the Sunni scholars and their Sunni methodology of verifying hadith. And then not only that, we give it a bit of a spin, and then we say, well, look, it's confirming what we said, it's from your own books. And then when the same thing happens to us, we start shouting and yelling, how dare you use a weak hadith? No scholar accepts this. This does not represent our faith, so on and so forth. But sometimes we fall into the same trap. And once again, social media in all of its platforms is encouraging a lot of combative Sunni Shia polemics, and it's really, really toxic. And I've been in a few of them, and it's just disheartening. There is, I don't know, like, you don't want to make judgments about people's intentions, but I don't like, you see the results of good intentions in the fruits of a discussion. They usually just end in people disrespecting each other. I don't know how you could have good intentions and be disrespecting each other. And this is the case. We're just trying to find whatever is in their books and to prove ourselves, and they do vice versa without like maybe seeing what their scholars have to say about this. I personally don't really favor Ibn Taymiyyah, but let's see what Ibn Taymiyyah has had to say about this hadith. Or let's see another scholar that's, has a strong anti-Shia rhetoric, what's his name? Alusi, for example. Alusi, I'm going to go look at his work. Or their view on Karbala even. Like, Karbala is a very, very sensitive topic for us. Do we have the heart to then go look at their perspective on it? Maybe don't. But if we want to have a strong intellectual position, if we want to be confident in what we believe in, we have to have that patience. We have to have that, that intellectual willingness to listen to that side and listen fairly, and like, especially the Sunni Shia polemic, sometimes we're unfair to each other. And this happens on both camps. We really are unfair to each other. On that side, they twist our views and they call us mushriks and, polytheists. And on our sides, we consider everyone to be, we consider a vast majority of Muslims to be almost naive, like everyone's just sheep. come on, like, let's be fair. They're human beings. They have reasoning. They have an upbringing. They have literature. 1,000 years of, some sciences started with our Sunni brothers and then flourished with the Shia scholars. Let's so there is content there, but yes, there are problems there, and that's why we believe in what we believe. But it doesn't mean everything is, we can't dismiss everything.
And when I look at like scholarship like this, like the examples the example I could give is one book that I was studying when I was in home, and the teacher that I had, right? So I was studying a book, Kitab al-Bay by Imam Khomeini, and this is basically it's a commentary of a commentary of a commentary of Maqasid of Sheikh Ansari, right? So what happens in our jurisprudence is we have this book by Sheikh Al-Ansari, and it's about business transactions, which obviously you know this. Now, his students or people from the generation after him took that book and made a commentary upon it. And the commentary that we have is not just explaining what he said and adding to it, it's critiquing it. It's accepting Sheikh Ansari as an amazing scholar, and then looking at what he said and say, look, I hear what you said here, I just disagree with it because of this, right? And it's great. Like, they're not taking, they're not looking at the person and saying, okay, I'm going to just accept what he says blindly. No, I'm going to look at this argument. I'm going to try to understand it from his perspective. And then I'm going to make a decision about it. And I'm going to either accept it or critique it. And then the next generation of scholars did that to the commentary. And then another one did that to that commentary. And then the book that I was studying was like the 4th level. So like the definition of what a business transaction is spans a few pages in Sheikh Al-Ansari's Maqasid, and spans about 85-90 pages in Imam Khomeini's Kitab al-Bay. And he's looking at all these different opinions about what this definition is and all their arguments supporting it, and then he's critiquing them. And look, sometimes, once in a while, there might be a harsh word about some opinion, but for the most part, it's like accepting this, this great scholar had this opinion, I disagree with it because of this reason. You know what I mean? And that approach, I feel, is amazing. And I feel that approach is seldomly used, like in Western or Eastern academia, seldomly used, right? Like, we don't have much when it comes to like Western academia. There are there's not many commentaries on positions. Like there's journal articles that will come out and will critique an opinion and say that this research methodology was weak because A, B, and C, or I don't agree with the conclusion here and this is why, or here's another study that might show that the category, there's 2 different parts of this category and they just lumped them together, or something like that. They will critique it, and that's how knowledge moves forward and advances, right? And similarly in the Hausa, with these commentaries, it's looking at the argument and then understanding it. So I remember my teacher, he would disagree with many of the arguments that were presented in the book from scholars before Imam Khomeini. He agreed with most of what the Imam said, but he would disagree with a lot of the previous scholars, but he would spend time making sure that we understood that position. So it wasn't, let me just run through this position that I disagree with and who cares. It's, let's really understand this, because when we really understand it, that's when we can critique it. If we don't really understand it, then what are we critiquing? And I feel a lot of times we're not really trying to understand the other side's position.
Absolutely. You mentioned Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayh. Recently, a little voice clip from Sheikh Subhani came out, and he was narrating a story from his time when he was attending the dars of Imam Khomeini, and he was taking the taqrirat, he was taking the transcripts of the lesson. And he wrote after an opinion that Imam Khomeini had criticized, that he said, وَالظَّاهِرُ أَنَّهُ ضَعِيفٌ, that and apparently this opinion is weak. And then, so he shows the transcript of Imam Khomeini, and then Imam Khomeini puts a line under that. He's like, do not forget to show respect to all the generation of scholars. Now, saying that an opinion is weak is actually very commonplace, you know, is very sort of in a polite way to say, it's not, you know, you said sometimes they might mention something harsh, but هذا ضعيفون الظاهر, and it's al-zahir, like apparently, like there is even showing reluctance. There is a level of respect there, but even Imam's like, change it to al-zahiru annahu ghayru tammin. It appears that this argument is not complete. There is some deficiencies in it. So he even went more polite. So, you know, that story, like the details some of our ulama paid attention to. And it's just, when you go on YouTube, you just see, I don't know, Sheikh Fulan destroyed Sayyid Fulan. Sayyid Fulan dominated this Christian priest. Christian priest, you know, annihilates Jewish rabbi. You know, it's just, it's that vibe. And that vibe is toxic. You know, it's that toxic polemics that happened. And it's really, I don't know, man, like, all right, 1 month, just leave this stuff for 1 month, and you just sit down and think to yourself, do I really care about these things? Like, yeah, I care about knowledge, but is it now really about the knowledge? Is it about my emotional satisfaction of what this gives me when I win an argument, you know? And how often these arguments are really not about winning. Usually it's the one who speaks better and is louder and has a few more people on his side and is able to crack more jokes that's going to dominate you, not the one who has the better arguments. So the things you have to do to win in those arguments are very, like, you know, deceitful things. And yeah, I think we can apply, you know, we have these great scholars, and this is the way this is the path they traversed, this is the path they took. But sometimes, unfortunately, on social media, we see scholars that give the negative side of this. You know, they just outlandishly speak against any view that's against them. They ridicule. They, in the name of being, you know, let's see, in the name of being revolutionary, in the name of being new thinking, so on and so forth. So, you know, we have that negative trend as well, which is sad, to be honest, very sad.
Yeah. Look, also going back to the fiqh issue that you brought up as well, right? Like the misconception of how ulama come up with rulings and stuff also really holds a play, because if you're looking at other opinions and you're really trying to critically examine them, first understand what they are, second really analyze and try to recognize why you might agree or disagree with them, then that takes time. Like, that's not something you could do in 10 minutes. You know what I mean? This is something that could take months to accomplish, and a lot of people don't have that time, so they resort to the 10-second TikTok, or you know, and that's it.
TikTok,
that's all the knowledge I need. You know, and I think that's one of the main issues as well, is we're not really giving time. So I know when I was studying in Qom, like, when you look at one ruling that you think is so simple that, oh, this is halal, or oh, this is haram, or like, I remember I was doing Hajj in Dars al-Kharij with Ayatul Maqam Shirazi, and one of the rulings was throwing the stone at the pillar, right? So the ruling, you have to throw the stone at the pillar 7 times. Yeah, simple, right? There's nothing to that. And I remember that ruling, just opening it up, looking at you know, what if you don't know if your stone hit the pillar or not? And now the pillars are bigger than they were before. Does it have to be the original area where the pillar is, or can it be any, like this whole wall that they have now? Does that all count? You know, all of these issues, right? And trying to then find out what the ruling is with those issues. And this subject of just throwing the stone at the pillar, which you would think is so simple, took weeks to uncover everything and to look at all the different arguments and to look at all the different ahadith and all the different Islamic principles that would apply, and then trying to put all of this information together to derive a ruling, right? And it's not easy. And then what I liked with Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi as well is that whenever there was an issue, like whenever there was a fatwa that Sunnis had opinion on, he would go to their sources and he would look at what they say as well. And this is their opinion. This is why they have this opinion. This is where it's from. This is what's supporting it. And this is why I agree or disagree with it. And then he would go and he would look at, you know, if there's a fiqh issue that has different opinions within the Shia Muraja, or within Shia ulama, he would say, okay, this is this one opinion. These scholars have this opinion. These are their arguments. Here's the other opinion. These are the scholars that have them. These are their arguments. These are the hadith that support argument A. These are the hadith that support argument B. These are the principles. And my opinion is this, and this is why. This is why I accept A or B or maybe something else, whatever his opinion is, right? And then he'll explain it. And that's like, I love that approach. It was very, his approach was very, you know, step by step, you know what's coming next. Like every fatwa that...
Almost algorithmic.
Yeah, every fatwa that you approach, it's the same style. Like, you know, all right, first we're going to look at this, then we're going to look at this, then we're going to look at this, and then we're going to come to a conclusion. And I really enjoyed looking at it, right? Whereas I went to Ba'ath al-Kharij for a very short period of time with Ayatollah Shahrudi. And Ayatollah Shahrudi was amazing as well, right? Probably, I don't know, no judgment, but he was absolutely out of this world. And I remember he was looking at the book of Zakat. And with Zakat, there's, you know, you have to pay Zakat on gold coins, right? And then he's bringing money into it. And he's saying, all right, does money count as gold coins? Right? Because although like it's paper, it's not gold, but the gold coins were a currency and this money is currency. So do we have to pay Zakat on cash, right? And he would, one day, first day I went, he presented all of the arguments saying that you don't have to. So there's no Zakat on cash. Like, all right, clear, simple, thank you, that was beautiful, very strong. There's no way we could disagree with it, and we go home. Next day he comes, and then he destroys that argument and presents, you know, reasoning as to why you would have to pay Zakat. So strong that you couldn't believe you couldn't believe that you accepted with him in day one.
Yeah.
And now you have a completely different, like, there's no way you could argue against what he said in the second day. Third day he comes and he destroys that argument and brings it back to you don't have to. And again, you're like, wow, like, how did this happen? You know what I mean? And so it wasn't as systematic as Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi, but the depth and the level of analysis was incredible. And, you know, we don't do that. Like, rarely do you find someone who's writing some opinion on Facebook or whatever, going through that level of analysis and thinking about an issue, right? And especially when it comes to a fiqh issue, where you've had scholars for centuries debate many of the issues. There's some, you know, new issues about, I don't know, stem cell research or something that's newer, but many of the issues that we discuss have been debated for centuries. There's arguments all way stronger than what you're, you know, whatever you could come up with, there's already that argument that exists. And the scholars have already taken that into account and have, you know, accepted or disagreed with it, and probably have reasoning that would go way over your head as to why, right? And we're just thinking, as you said, some person who spent 10 minutes thinking about something compared to someone who spent 2 decades thinking about something. We're coming up with the opinion, just throwing it out there as if we're somebody. I feel that that's really, really problematic, and it's something that a lot of people need to take a step back and really think about where they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, that was a beautiful recount of your attendance in those durus. Just an observation. I assume that maybe Ghai Sharudi had a system as well, but just because he was just so like in control of the material and how he directs the discussion, sometimes you feel like maybe there is no system. But
no, his system was to completely destroy you.
As Shakespeare say, there's method in this madness,
No, he wanted to present an argument so strong, right, but obviously there's levels to students as well. So me being a baby student, I'm just going to listen to it. I'm not going to be able to argue against it, but I'm sure there were students that were stronger that would have went home after the first day and would have said, look, I hear this argument, but I feel that there's these holes here. And then they would have gone into that second day and done the same thing. So he's training you to analyze the situation. It's not as systematic as Ayatollah Makram Shirazi, but the level of analysis was stronger, right? So he's training you to really analyze the sources and analyze the arguments and try to find holes. Like, he doesn't want to create sheep. He's not giving an opinion just for you to accept it, right? That's not the point of Dars al-Kharij. The point of Dars al-Kharij is to come to the point where you could produce an argument as to why you feel a ruling should be A or B, and that argument be sound. And the only way to be able to do that is to analyze the previous arguments and the previous and the scriptural sources that we have and the principles that we have and all of that, and then argue for your point, right? Now, Ayatollah Makram Shirazi was saying, all right, the way that we argue is A, B, C, D, E, F, and then there's a conclusion. Ayatollah Shahrudi didn't have that approach. He said, let me present this argument, analyze it, come back tomorrow, and we'll see if it holds weight or not, right? And then the next day's argument, again, go home, analyze it. Now you have two different arguments. Come and see where we go, what happens on the third day. And like, as you'll see when you continue your studies, the amount of hours a day in class decreases the longer you stay. And then the amount of hours outside of class should increase, right? So the amount you go to Dars al-Kharij for an hour for fiqh and maybe an hour for usul, and that's 2 hours a day of class. But the amount of time that you should be putting into analyzing what the teacher said and preparing for the lesson the next day, it should take you, as many hours to make you a full-time student. So however many hours you're studying, right? And that is how you get something out of it. If you're just writing down the arguments and not analyzing them and not looking at them and not trying to tear them apart, then what are you doing?
That's right.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
But it's interesting, like the level of analysis that's done. Like I haven't found anywhere that's anywhere close to that. Not saying it doesn't exist anywhere, but I haven't found anywhere in any circle that puts that amount of effort into analyzing arguments.
You know what that shows? Even at that high level, we have different methodologies in looking at the literature. At the very advanced level, sometimes we might have this assumption that, okay, after 10, 20 years, that this person becomes a mujtahid. Now they all sort of do the same thing. But no, the real juicy stuff starts to happen then. This person, like you said, Sheikh Makarim, very much like Ayatollah Burujerdi and very much like Ayatollah Sistani, they pay attention to even sources outside the intra-creed our Shia literature. They go and look at the Sunni madhab and what they have to say. And then you have the likes of, for example, Sheikh or Sayyid Shahrudi rahmatullahi alayh. The way you were describing him, I remember I was speaking to another Sheikh and he was just calling him a magician. And he was just playing with the arguments. And I very sad that I couldn't obviously make it to attend his classes. He passed away. But what you said sort of reminds me of Sheikh Ansari in Makasib as well. He takes you to one side and you're like, yeah, this has got to be right. And then he starts a whole, entourage of arguments on the other side. And if we can be critical thinkers like that in everyday life, in the stuff that's thrown to us, and that's what I was mentioning earlier, we don't have to have an opinion straight away. If people ask us, sorry, I just don't know. I haven't made up my mind. I'm still reading. I'm still researching. And that's, I think, a much more, it presents more of a character in that person than making sure you have something always to say.
Yep, definitely. Sheikh, I think we're over time now.
Yeah,
time flies. Anyways, inshallah, we'll be back next week. But for now, assalamu alaikum, Sheikhna. It was good, as always, speaking with you and discussing these things. Inshallah, next week we'll have something interesting as well.
Inshallah.
All right. Wassalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Thank you very much to our Shuyukh for that interesting discussion. May Allah bless you all in this life and the next, inshallah. That's it for tonight's program. Everyone stay safe. Inshallah, we'll see you again next week via Zoom. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.